Ever wonder what happens when a woman, scorned and underestimated, decides she's had enough? This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a masterclass in revenge, served ice-cold on a silver platter. The lie was as dazzling as the crystal chandeliers hanging in the grand ballroom of the Atoria. On the most important night of the city's social calendar, billionaire industrialist Marcus Davin stood on stage, a proud arm around a stunning young woman. He called her his partner, his inspiration, the future. The applause was thunderous, a symphony of approval for a man at the peak of his power. But in a city built on secrets, the most devastating truths don't send a warning. They simply walk in. And as the ballroom doors swung open, the real Mrs. Davin entered, not with tears in her eyes, but with the city's most feared litigator by her side. The applause faltered, dying in waves across the opulent room. Champagne glasses froze midway to lips, and a story of quiet betrayal was about to become a very public execution. Isabel Davin believed their life was a masterpiece of careful construction. Their 15-year marriage was a fortress built brick by brick with shared ambition, mutual respect, and the quiet understanding that their union was a powerful partnership. Their penthouse on Park Avenue wasn't just a home. It was a testament to their joint success, a castle in the sky. Its panoramic windows overlooked a city they had, in many ways, conquered together. Marcus was the face of Davin Industries, the charismatic innovator who charmed boardrooms and financial journalists. But Isabel was the architect, the unseen force behind the throne. She was the one who had guided his raw ambition, smoothed his rough edges, and curated their social circle with the precision of a master jeweler, selecting perfect gems. She hosted the dinners that sealed the deals. She remembered the names of investors' children, their birthdays, their favorite toys. She was the silent, steady hand on the tiller of their shared empire. The first crack in the fortress was almost imperceptible. A stray scent of a perfume that wasn't hers on his suit jacket. It wasn't the fleeting fragrance of a passing colleague, but something that lingered, intimate and clawing. He'd laughed it off with practiced ease. "You know how it is at these press events, darling. Everyone wants a hug." Then came the late nights, attributed to a supply chain crisis in Asia that required calls at 3 a.m. The phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually screened down or in his pocket, a silent sentinel guarding his secrets. He became defensive about his schedule, his explanations for weekend trips becoming just a little too detailed, a little too polished. Isabel was not a fool. She was a woman who could read a balance sheet and spot a discrepancy of $1 in a multi-million-dollar budget. She could certainly read the signs of a man hiding something. The pain was a cold, sharp thing in her chest, a constant, unwelcome companion. But she refused to let it consume her. Hysteria was a currency she did not trade in. Instead, she did what she always did when faced with a problem: she gathered data. She started small, a casual mention of a restaurant he claimed to have had a business dinner at, only to see a flicker of confusion in his eyes before he recovered. "Oh, was it Tuesday? I meant Wednesday. The days are blurring together." She checked their joint credit card statements, and the narrative of his lies began to unravel. There were charges at boutique hotels she'd never heard of, florists in neighborhoods they never frequented. And a recurring charge for a high-end spa package, a gift for his sister, he claimed, though his sister lived in London and loathed spas. The data points formed a constellation of deceit. The final confirmation came not from a statement, but from a photograph. A friend vacationing in the Caribbean sent her a breezy text, "Isn't this Marcus? Small world." Attached was a blurry photo of a man with Marcus's distinctive silver-streaked hair, his arm draped possessively around a young, raven-haired woman on the beach. They were laughing, their heads close together, a picture of carefree intimacy. The woman was Sienna Hayes, a junior marketing executive at Davin Industries, whom Isabel had met briefly at a company Christmas party. She was ambitious, beautiful, and 2 decades younger than Marcus. The sight of it didn't break Isabel. It galvanized her. The pain was still there, a low, humming frequency beneath her skin, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was a flagrant betrayal, a dismantling of the fortress she had helped build, stone by stone. Marcus wasn't just cheating on her. He was making a mockery of their entire life together, erasing her from their shared history. She didn't confront him. An emotional confrontation would give him the advantage, allow him to gaslight her, to twist the narrative until she was the hysterical, paranoid wife. No, this required a different kind of warfare. This required a strategist. She made a call, not to a friend, not to her mother, but to a name she had kept in her private contacts for years, a contingency plan for a disaster she had prayed would never strike. Arthur Finch, please. Arthur Finch was a legend in New York's legal circles. He was old school, a man who wore perfectly tailored three-piece suits and spoke in measured, devastatingly precise sentences. He didn't handle messy, emotional divorces. He handled dissolutions of dynasties. He was the man you called when a partnership worth billions was on the line, and you needed to walk away with not just your share, but your dignity intact. Their first meeting was in his wood-paneled office overlooking the East River. Isabel laid out her suspicions calmly and methodically, presenting the credit card statements and the photograph as if they were exhibits in a corporate takeover bid. She did not cry. Her voice did not shake. Finch listened, his steepled fingers resting on his chin, his gaze sharp and assessing. He'd seen countless betrayed spouses, but there was a steely resolve in Isabel Davin that was rare. "Infidelity is the simplest part of this, Mrs. Davin," he said when she finished. "It's a symptom, not the disease. A man this reckless with his personal life is often reckless with his finances. He believes he is invincible." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "He believes the assets are his, not ours. I recommend we engage a forensic accounting team. Quietly. Let's see what else he's been partnering in." Over the next 3 weeks, a ghost team guided by Finch delved into the labyrinth of Davin Industries' finances and Marcus and Isabel's joint holdings. What they began to uncover was far worse than a simple affair. Marcus wasn't just spending marital money on his mistress, he was moving it. Large sums were being siphoned from joint accounts into newly created shell corporations with opaque names like Apex Global Holdings and Viridian Solutions. He was systematically undervaluing company assets in preparation for a restructuring, a move that would shield the company's true worth during a potential divorce settlement. He was, in essence, trying to steal their shared future from under her nose. The centerpiece of his hubris was the upcoming St. Jude's Children's Foundation Gala. Marcus was the event chair this year. It was the pinnacle of the social season, a night where the city's elite gathered to display their wealth and philanthropy. He had been planning it for months, obsessed with every detail. Isabel now understood why. It wasn't about charity. It was to be his coronation, the night he would publicly transition from his old life to his new one. A week before the gala, Finch called Isabel. "We have it," he said, his voice grim. "The paper trail is undeniable. He's been setting up Miss Hayes in a company-funded apartment, has her on a shadow payroll, and the Apex Global account was used to purchase a significant portfolio of unregistered bonds. He's not just preparing for a divorce, Mrs. Davin. This borders on criminal fraud." A plan began to form in Isabel's mind, cold and brilliant. Marcus wanted a public stage for his new life, she would give him one. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor, "the St. Jude's Gala is on Saturday. I assume my ticket as Mrs. Davin is still valid." "Of course," he replied, confused. "But are you sure you want to?" "I am," she interrupted. "And I would like you to be my escort." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then a slow, deep chuckle. Arthur Finch, a man not given to overt displays of emotion, sounded almost impressed. "It would be my distinct honor, Mrs. Davin. I shall have the necessary documents prepared and brought with me." A simple divorce petition seems inadequate under the circumstances. I'll bring the works. Isabel hung up the phone and walked over to her closet. She pushed past the rows of classic, elegant gowns she had always worn to compliment Marcus. At the very back, in a protective garment bag, was a dress she had bought on a whim but never dared to wear. It was a stunning creation of crimson silk that was both breathtakingly elegant and utterly defiant. It was not the dress of a supportive wife. It was the dress of a woman coming to claim what was hers. The grand ballroom of the Attoria was a symphony of excess. The air hummed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes and the soft strains of a string quartet. Light from a dozen crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, fractured and danced across diamond necklaces and silk lapels. This was the beating heart of New York's old and new money, a room where fortunes were burnished and reputations were made or broken. At the center of it all, like a king holding court, was Marcus Davin. He stood near the main stage, a vision of tailored success in his Tom Ford tuxedo. But it wasn't his suit that drew every eye in the room. It was the woman on his arm. Sienna Hayes was radiant, poured into a silver sequined gown that caught the light with her every breath. Her raven hair was styled in glamorous waves, her smile wide and confident. She clung to Marcus's arm, not as a guest, but as a hostess, a partner. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd like a virus. "Is that Sienna Hayes from his marketing department?" a banker murmured to her husband. "Where is Isabel?" "I heard they've been having trouble," the husband replied, his eyes narrowing. "But this is a declaration of war." "She looks barely old enough to be his daughter," sniped a society columnist, discreetly typing notes into her phone under the table. Davin's midlife crisis is apparently being sponsored by Cartier. Marcus was oblivious. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. He was high on the audacity of his own actions. For months, he had felt suffocated by Isabel's quiet competence, her unspoken judgment of his increasingly risky business ventures. He craved the uncritical adoration Sienna gave him. She didn't question his decisions, she applauded them. She didn't see him as a partner to be managed, she saw him as a titan to be worshipped. In her eyes, he was invincible. And tonight, he was determined to show the world that same vision of himself. He greeted Harrison Blackwood, a grizzled, powerful investor whose firm held a 30% stake in Davin Industries. Blackwood was a man who valued stability above all else. "Marcus," Blackwood grunted, his eyes flicking to Sienna. "Good to see you. And this is Harrison, I'd like you to meet Sienna Hayes," Marcus announced, his voice booming with pride. "Sienna is my partner, an incredible force in my life and a rising star at the company." The word partner hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. It was not "my guest" or "my friend." It was a public replacement. Sienna beamed, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Mr. Blackwood, it's an honor. I've heard so much about you." Blackwood gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable but cool. "Mrs. Davin not joining you this evening?" he asked, his tone casual, but the question pointed. "Isabel is indisposed," Marcus said with a dismissive wave of his hand. It was a weak lie, and he knew it, but he was committed now. The momentum of the night was carrying him forward. He led Sienna through the room, a conquering hero showing off his prize. He introduced her to councilmen, to philanthropists, to the very people whose foundations Isabel had so carefully cultivated for years. With each introduction, his confidence swelled. He was rewriting his own story in real time, erasing 15 years of marriage with a smile and a handshake. Sienna, for her part, played the role flawlessly. She was charming, attentive, and laughed at all his jokes. She believed this was her arrival, the moment she transitioned from a secret affair to the rightful queen. The culmination of his arrogance was the opening speech. As the event chair, it was his duty to welcome the guests and kick off the fundraiser. He strode onto the stage, Sienna watching from a front-row table he had reserved for them. The spotlight found him, and a hush fell over the ballroom. "Welcome, friends, colleagues, leaders of this great city," he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "We are here tonight for a noble cause, to support the miracles performed every day at St. Jude's, a cause that reminds us that our future lies in our children." He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the adoring faces. "But tonight is also about another kind of future. It's about vision, about passion, about finding that spark that reignites your soul." His gaze drifted toward Sienna's table. "True partnership isn't just about history. It's about a shared vision for tomorrow. It's about finding an inspiration that pushes you to be bolder, to reach higher." He raised his glass. "So, I want to propose a toast. Not just to the children of St. Jude's, but to new beginnings, to passion, and to the partners who inspire us to build a better future." The room erupted in applause, though some of it was hesitant, confused. The old guard, the friends of Isabel, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew Isabel Davin. They knew she was not a woman to be indisposed. Something was deeply wrong. Harrison Blackwood, sitting at his table, did not applaud. He simply watched Marcus, his expression hardening into one of deep concern. He was a man who hated instability, and Marcus Davin was currently bathing in it on a public stage. Marcus took in the applause, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. He felt powerful, untouchable. He had done it. He had presented his new life to the world, and the world had accepted it. He stepped down from the stage, his chest puffed with pride, and walked back toward Sienna, ready to accept her congratulations. It was in that precise moment of supreme self-satisfaction that the grand oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. They didn't open tentatively, they were pushed open with authority, revealing two figures silhouetted against the light of the outer hall. The noise in the ballroom did not stop at once. It died a slow, rolling death, starting from the tables nearest the door and spreading like a shock wave. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Laughter caught in throats. Champagne glasses froze in the air. The string quartet faltered, one violin squeaking into the sudden, cavernous silence. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. And there, standing in the doorway, was the woman who was supposedly indisposed. Isabel Davin did not look like a woman scorned. She looked like a queen arriving to reclaim her throne. She paused in the doorway, allowing the room to absorb the full impact of her presence. The crimson silk of her gown was a slash of defiance against the muted palette of the room's golds and creams. The dress was a masterpiece of tailoring, elegant but with a daring cut that spoke of newfound liberation. Her hair was swept up in a severe, graceful chignon, showcasing the diamonds at her ears, the first gift Marcus had ever given her, a symbol of the beginnings he was so eager to toast. Her face was a mask of serene composure, but her eyes, dark and focused, swept across the room with an intensity that made people physically recoil. Beside her stood Arthur Finch. He was a stark, imposing figure in his dark, impeccably tailored suit. He carried a fine leather briefcase, holding it not like an accessory, but like a weapon. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture was ramrod straight. He was the personification of sober, expensive consequence, and his presence next to Isabel transformed her arrival from a mere social disruption into a declaration of intent. The silence in the ballroom was now absolute, thick, and heavy. The only sound was the faint, distant hum of the city outside. As Isabel and Finch began to walk forward, a path cleared before them as if by an invisible force. People didn't just move aside, they leaned away, pulling in their chairs, a collective physical act of disassociation from the impending collision. Marcus stood frozen by the stage, his triumphant smile melting into a mask of disbelief. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. This was not the Isabel he knew. The Isabel he knew would have called him, screaming. She would have made a scene in the privacy of their home. She would have dissolved into tears. She would never, ever engage in a public confrontation. This cold, regal, avenging figure was a stranger to him. His gaze flickered to Sienna. The color had drained from her face. The confident smile she had worn all night had vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed panic. Her hand, which had been resting on Marcus's arm, slipped away. She suddenly looked exactly what she was, a young woman in a borrowed gown, catastrophically out of her depth. The fantasy of the evening had just collided with a brutal reality. Isabel's walk was not a walk, it was a procession. Her heels clicked with a steady, metronomic rhythm on the polished marble floor. Each click, an indictment. She didn't look at the whispering guests or the gawking faces. Her eyes were locked on one target, her husband. As she drew closer, the details of her transformation became more apparent. She was wearing the Davin diamonds, a legendary necklace of staggering value that was a family heirloom reserved only for the most significant occasions. Wearing it tonight was a power play of breathtaking audacity. It was a physical reminder to everyone in the room, especially Marcus, of the legacy and the dynasty he was attempting to discard. Marcus finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Isabel, what are you doing here? I thought you were unwell." Isabel didn't break her stride. She and Finch continued their slow, deliberate advance until they stood directly in front of Marcus and Sienna. The four of them formed a small, silent tableau in the center of the vast room, the unwilling focus of hundreds of pairs of eyes. The air crackled with tension. This was no longer just gossip. This was a spectacle. Isabel finally stopped, standing so close to Marcus that he could see the icy fire in her eyes. She looked from his stunned face to the terrified one of Sienna Hayes. She offered Sienna a small, pitying smile that was more terrifying than any expression of rage. Then she turned her gaze back to her husband. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was so clear and cold that it carried through the silent ballroom as if amplified. "Unwell?" Isabel said, a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised. "On the contrary, Marcus. I have never felt better. I've just been finalizing some new arrangements." She glanced at Arthur Finch, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The moment had arrived. The carefully constructed world of Marcus Davin, built on a foundation of lies and arrogance, was about to be publicly and systematically demolished. The ballroom held its collective breath. The confrontation had moved beyond the realm of domestic dispute. It felt like a formal duel, with Isabel and Finch as the challengers. Marcus, recovering a sliver of his blustering bravado, tried to seize control. "Isabel, this is neither the time nor the place," he hissed, his voice low and furious. He gestured vaguely at the sea of onlookers. "You're making a scene." "A scene?" Isabel's laugh was a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "You were just on that stage, Marcus, toasting to new beginnings with your partner. I believe you're the one who set the stage. I'm merely playing my part." Her gaze flickered contemptuously toward Sienna, who flinched as if struck. "And you," Isabel said, her voice dropping to a tone of chilling dismissal, "are clearly out of your league." Sienna paled, looking to Marcus for defense, but he was too consumed by the disaster unfolding to offer any. He was a cornered animal, his eyes darting between his wife and her lawyer, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Now is not the time for this," he repeated, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. "We'll discuss this at home." "There is no at home anymore, Marcus," Isabel stated flatly. "And we won't be discussing this. Mr. Finch will be handling all our future correspondence." At this cue, Arthur Finch stepped forward with a deliberate, unhurried motion. He placed his leather briefcase on a nearby empty table. The clicks of the latches opening sounded like gunshots in the silent room. He withdrew a single, thick envelope made of heavy, cream-colored vellum. It was pristinely white, official, and radiated an aura of immense legal gravity. Marcus Davin, Finch said, his voice the calm, resonant baritone of a man who has delivered bad news for a living and learned to enjoy it. He held the envelope out. On behalf of my client, Isabel Davin, I am serving you with this petition for the dissolution of your marriage. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. This was it, the point of no return. Marcus stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. You can't be serious, he stammered, looking at Isabel. 15 years. You're throwing away 15 years over. Over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Isabel's voice was laced with disbelief. You call systematic deception a misunderstanding? You call her, she gestured again at Sienna, a misunderstanding? No, Marcus. This is a clarification. Finch extended the envelope further. Mr. Davin, I advise you to take the document. Marcus's hands remained at his sides, clenched into fists. He was trapped. To take the envelope was to admit defeat, to refuse it was to look weak and petulant. The entire social and financial elite of New York was watching him, their faces a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and schadenfreude. From his table, Harrison Blackwood watched the scene with an expression of pure fury. This public implosion was precisely the kind of instability he abhorred. A man who couldn't manage his own marriage certainly couldn't be trusted to manage a billion-dollar corporation. Seeing Marcus hesitate, Finch took another step forward and, with a finality that brooked no argument, placed the envelope squarely in the breast pocket of Marcus's tuxedo. He didn't shove it, he placed it with the cool precision of a mortician. It was a violation, an act of legal and social dominance that left Marcus looking utterly powerless. That is a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery, Finch continued, his voice calm and clear for all to hear. It includes a temporary restraining order, preventing you from accessing, transferring, or liquidating any and all marital assets, effective immediately. Every joint account has been frozen as of 1 hour ago. An emergency injunction was granted by Judge Miller this afternoon. The color drained from Marcus's face. Frozen. All of them. He had millions moving, deals pending. This was more than an embarrassment, this was a financial garrote. You can't do that, he sputtered. Oh, it's already been done, Finch replied smoothly. He then turned his cool gaze to Sienna Hayes, who looked as if she was about to faint. And Miss Hayes, Finch said, his tone turning to ice. A word of advice. The apartment you currently reside in at the Olympic Tower is a corporate asset, funded through an account now under legal scrutiny. The vehicle you are driving is registered to the Davin Marital Trust. The credit card you used this afternoon at Bergdorf's has been cancelled. I would suggest you make alternative arrangements immediately. Sienna's mouth opened and closed silently. The foundation of her new, glamorous life had just been vaporized in a single paragraph. The silver gown suddenly felt like a costume for a play that had just been cancelled. But Finch wasn't finished. The divorce petition was only the opening salvo. He reached back into his briefcase. That, Mr. Davin, Arthur Finch said, pulling out a second, even thicker document, is the civil matter. This is something more pressing. The air in the ballroom grew colder, the silence more profound. If the first envelope was a declaration of war, the second one, held aloft by Arthur Finch, felt like a notice of execution. It was bound not in a simple envelope, but in a heavy, dark blue legal binder. Marcus stared at the binder, a primal fear beginning to eclipse his anger and humiliation. This went beyond divorce. The mention of frozen accounts was a warning shot, but the presence of this second, more formidable document signaled a catastrophe of a different magnitude. What is that? Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. This, Finch announced, his voice carrying with deliberate clarity, is a copy of a report that was delivered via courier to the office of the District Attorney for New York County and to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission approximately 90 minutes ago. A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. The District Attorney. The SEC. These were not terms one heard in a marital dispute. This was the language of corporate malfeasance, of criminal investigation. The drama had escalated from a juicy society scandal to a potential white-collar crime thriller. Harrison Blackwood, the major investor, leaned forward in his chair, his face a grim mask. His investment wasn't just in Davin Industries, it was in the perceived integrity of its leader. That integrity was now being shredded live on the ballroom floor. Isabel stood by, a silent, powerful observer. She had known this was coming. She had reviewed the forensic accountant's report with Finch, page by damning page. She had seen the web of deceit Marcus had woven, not just around her, but around their entire financial existence. Her initial pain had curdled into a resolve as hard as steel. He hadn't just betrayed her heart, he had tried to steal her legacy. Finch tapped the blue binder. This report details a pattern of financial misconduct, Mr. Davin. It outlines the systematic siphoning of funds from marital accounts and, more significantly, from corporate coffers into unauthorized, unaudited shell corporations. Finch paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then delivered the killing blow, naming the ghost entity they had uncovered. Specifically, into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Global Holdings. A company whose sole director, Finch's eyes bored into Marcus, is you. And whose primary beneficiary appears to be a Miss Sienna Hayes. At the mention of her name in connection with a Cayman Islands shell company, Sienna let out a small, strangled gasp. Her involvement had just been upgraded from adulteress to potential co-conspirator. The dream of a life of luxury with a powerful man curdled into a nightmare of depositions and legal fees. She looked at Marcus with terror-filled eyes, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Finch, his face ashen. He was exposed, utterly and completely. The report details several fraudulent wire transfers, Finch continued, his tone relentless. Including a sum of $5 million transferred just last week to purchase unregistered bearer bonds, a classic instrument of money laundering. It also details the deliberate undervaluing of company assets ahead of a planned private sale of a key subsidiary, a sale from which the profits would have been diverted to Apex Global, defrauding your shareholders. At the phrase, defrauding your shareholders, Harrison Blackwood pushed his chair back with a loud scrape that echoed in the funereal silence. He rose to his full, imposing height, his face thunderous. The man he had entrusted with hundreds of millions of dollars was being accused, with damning specificity, of orchestrating a massive fraud. Marcus. Blackwood's voice was a low roar that cut through the tension. Every eye in the room swiveled to him. Is this true? Marcus couldn't speak. He was drowning. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His carefully constructed world of power and influence was collapsing around him in real time. Finch didn't give him a chance to formulate a lie. The evidence is comprehensive, Mr. Blackwood. Wire transfer confirmations, incorporation documents from the Caymans, emails from Mr. Davin's personal server instructing his offshore agent. It's all in the report. Blackwood looked from Finch's unyielding face to Marcus's crumbling one. He didn't need any more confirmation. He had seen enough corporate implosions to recognize one in the making. He pointed a thick finger at Marcus. You're finished, Davin. Consider my firm's confidence withdrawn. My lawyers will be in touch with the board first thing Monday morning. We're calling for an immediate independent audit and your immediate suspension as CEO. It was a public execution. In the space of 5 minutes, Marcus Davin had gone from being the chairman of the Gala to a social pariah, a soon-to-be ex-husband, and a suspended CEO facing federal investigation. The edifice of his life had not just cracked, it had been dynamited. And holding the detonator was his wife, the quiet, competent architect he had so fatally underestimated. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Harrison Blackwood's denouncement acted as a final, definitive judgment. The quiet whispers in the room erupted into a low, excited roar. Cell phones, previously held discreetly, were now raised openly, recording the corporate titan's spectacular fall from grace. The story was no longer just a rumor, it was a verified, unfolding news event. Sienna Hayes, finally grasping the totality of her ruin, did the only thing she could. She turned and fled. Clutching the skirt of her now tawdry silver gown, she pushed her way through the stunned crowd, her face a mess of tears and running mascara. She didn't look back. Her fairy tale had ended, and she was running from the wreckage before she was formally named as a defendant. Marcus stood alone, a solitary, pathetic figure in the center of the room. The thick divorce petition was still visible in his tuxedo pocket, a white flag of surrender. The specter of the blue binder and the SEC investigation hung over him like a shroud. His eyes, wide with panic, scanned the room, looking for a friendly face, an ally, but found only condemnation, pity, and the hungry gleam of gossip. He was utterly, publicly alone. Isabel watched him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a profound, weary finality. This was the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with. Seeing him so completely broken was a grim necessity, not a victory to be savored. She had done what she had to do to protect herself and her future. She turned to Arthur Finch. "Thank you, Arthur," she said quietly. "I think your work here is done." Finch gave a small, respectful bow of his head. "The pleasure was all mine, Mrs. Davin." He closed his briefcase with 2 decisive clicks, the sound sealing Marcus's fate. But Isabel wasn't finished. This was not just about tearing Marcus down, it was about her own ascent from the ashes. She was a major benefactor of the St. Jude's Foundation, and as the wife of the event chair, she was listed on the program as a keynote speaker. It was time to deliver her speech. With a grace and poise that defied the chaos of the preceding moments, she walked towards the stage. The event organizers, who had been frozen in panicked indecision, saw her approach and instinctively parted for her. The technical crew, sensing a shift, killed the frantic background music and readjusted the spotlight, following her as she ascended the few steps to the podium. She stood where her husband had stood just minutes before, toasting his own arrogance. The room fell silent once more, but this time it was a silence of rapt attention, of awe. Isabel looked out over the sea of faces, the powerful, the wealthy, the influential. She adjusted the microphone, her hands steady. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and strong, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. "My husband was just up here speaking about new beginnings, about passion and vision. And on that, for the first time in a long time, we find ourselves in agreement." A murmur went through the crowd. "For 15 years, I have been a partner," she continued, her voice resonating with quiet power. "I believed in a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. I have learned tonight that some partnerships are not built to last. But foundations are. Legacies are." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, meeting the eyes of friends, of business associates, of people who had known her only as Marcus Davin's elegant wife. The St. Jude's Foundation is a testament to what can be built with integrity and a true, unwavering commitment to a noble cause. It is about protecting the vulnerable and building a better future. These are values I hold dear. Values that, going forward, will be the sole guide for all my endeavors. She leaned closer to the microphone. "Tonight, I was scheduled to announce a joint donation of $1 million from the Davin family. That plan has changed." The room held its breath. "Instead," Isabel declared, her voice ringing with conviction, "I am personally pledging $5 million to the St. Jude's Children's Foundation." Gasps of astonishment, and then a wave of spontaneous, thunderous applause filled the ballroom. It was a staggering sum, a power move of incredible proportions. She wasn't just divorcing her husband, she was financially eclipsing him on the grandest stage possible. Furthermore, she called out, as the applause began to subside, "I am announcing the formation of my own foundation, the Isabel D. foundation for ethical enterprise and women's empowerment. Its first mission will be to fund and mentor female entrepreneurs who lead with integrity, so they never have to compromise their values or find their futures stolen by the deceit of others. The applause that followed was deafening. It was a standing ovation. Harrison Blackwood was clapping the loudest, a look of profound respect on his face. The women in the room, in particular, were on their feet, their faces alight with admiration. In one speech, Isabel had transformed herself from the wronged wife into a philanthropic powerhouse, a symbol of resilience and strength. She had not only won the battle, she had rewritten the entire narrative. Marcus was no longer the central character in the story. He was a footnote, a disgraced catalyst for the rise of Isabel Davin. He watched from below the stage, utterly defeated, as the world that was once his gave her a hero's ovation. Isabel gave a small, graceful nod, a queen acknowledging her court. She then walked off the stage, not back towards the drama, but towards a side exit where her driver was waiting. She did not look back at her husband. She was already focused on her new beginning, leaving him to be consumed by the ruins of the life he had so carelessly destroyed. The dawn that followed the St. Jude's Gala broke over New York City with a cold, impartial light, illuminating two vastly different realities. For Marcus Davin, it was a dawn of damnation. He awoke not in his palatial Park Avenue penthouse, but in a sterile, anonymous suite at the Four Seasons, a place he had fled to in a blind panic. The first thing he noticed was the silence, a stark contrast to the usual morning hum of his life. No housekeeper bringing coffee, no Isabel moving gracefully through the rooms. Then he saw his phone on the nightstand. It showed 97 missed calls, over 200 unread messages, a digital avalanche of panic, condemnation, and morbid curiosity. He switched on the television, and his own haggard, humiliated face stared back at him from every major news channel. The footage of Isabel's arrival, of Finch serving the papers, of his public denunciation by Harrison Blackwood, was playing on a loop. Pundits were not just dissecting a divorce, they were performing a corporate autopsy, with him as the corpse. His own high-powered corporate lawyer, a man named Garrett Shaw, left a string of increasingly frantic voicemails, culminating in one that simply said, "Marcus, do not speak to anyone. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already reached out. This is a 5-alarm fire." For Isabel Davin, the dawn brought a profound, cleansing quiet. She woke in her own bed, the crimson gown from the night before draped over a chair like a discarded battle standard. The vast penthouse, once a shared space, felt different, larger, filled with potential. It was hers now. She made coffee herself, the simple act feeling like a reclamation. She didn't turn on the television, she didn't need to. She had written the script. Instead, she sat by the large window overlooking the park, watching the city come to life, and began to make a list not of grievances, but of objectives. Her war was not over, it had simply entered a new, constructive phase. The first objective was met later that day. At the headquarters of Davin Industries, in a boardroom lined with portraits of Marcus's father and grandfather, the remaining board members assembled. Harrison Blackwood presided over the meeting with the grim authority of a hanging judge. Marcus was not invited. His presence was represented by his lawyer, Garrett Shaw, who looked pale and beleaguered. "The facts are clear," Blackwood began, his voice like gravel. "Davin's actions have exposed this company to catastrophic legal and financial risk. He has embarrassed us. He has defrauded us. And he has, in one night, torched a reputation built over 50 years. The stock is in freefall. Our lenders are calling. This is not a discussion. This is a sanitation effort." The vote was a mere formality. Marcus Davin was stripped of his titles, his access to the building revoked, his corporate accounts frozen. He was officially an exile from the kingdom he had once ruled. Meanwhile, the ripples of the Gala continued to spread, engulfing the smaller players. Sienna Hayes found her world had shrunk to the size of a friend's cramped studio apartment in Astoria, Queens. Her glamorous clothes and jewelry, bought with Marcus's money, felt like a cheap costume. Her phone buzzed not with invitations, but with threats and vile messages from strangers. Marcus had blocked her number. She was a pariah. The true terror arrived 2 days later in the form of a knock on the door. A stern-faced man in a cheap suit served her with a subpoena to testify before a grand jury regarding her knowledge of Apex Global Holdings. As she stared at the official document, the words blurring through her tears, she finally understood. She had never been his partner. She had been a high-risk, disposable asset, and she had just been liquidated. While their worlds collapsed, Isabel was building. Her penthouse became a command center. Her team assembled daily, Arthur Finch, managing the legal blitzkrieg, a sharp, formidable PR executive named Clara Rossi, who was shaping the public narrative, and a shrewd wealth manager who was helping Isabel untangle her finances and lay the groundwork for her new foundation. "The media is framing you as the avenging angel," Clara reported in one meeting, pointing to a series of headlines. "It's powerful, but we need to pivot from revenge to renaissance. The foundation is the key. It redefines your identity from the ex-Mrs. Davin to Isabel D., founder and philanthropist." Isabel listened, absorbed, and directed. The name is crucial. It needs to be forward-looking. The Isabel D. Foundation for Ethical Enterprise and Women's Empowerment, she stated, the name she had conceived and announced on stage. "Our mission isn't just to give money. It's to build scaffolding for women who have the talent but lack the access, to ensure their ventures are built on unshakable ethical ground." Her clarity and vision impressed them all. This was not a woman being guided by professionals, this was a CEO leading her new venture. The ultimate, most stunning validation came a week later. The call came directly to her private line. "Isabel, it's Harrison Blackwood." His voice was respectful, almost deferential. "I'm calling on behalf of the board of Davin Industries. We are in a crisis of confidence. The brand is toxic because of Marcus. The only person who has emerged from this with their reputation enhanced, in fact, burnished to a high shine, is you." Isabel was silent, listening. "The company needs you," Blackwood said bluntly. "You are the strategic mind behind the early successes. You have the name, but more importantly, you have the integrity. We want to offer you a seat on the board of directors." The irony was so thick she could taste Ito sit in the seat of power her husband had just been violently ejected from. Her first instinct was to refuse, to cut all ties. But then she thought of the employees, of the Legacia legacy that was as much hers as it was his. It was her strategy that had guided its early growth. It was her inheritance, too, in a way. "Harrison," she replied, her voice steady, "I will accept on 2 conditions. First, the board must fund a complete, top-to-bottom independent review of the company's ethical compliance protocols. Second, the company will become a cornerstone benefactor of my foundation." Blackwood didn't hesitate. "Done. Welcome to the board, Isabel." A month later, a letter arrived, forwarded by Arthur Finch's office. It was handwritten on cheap stationery, the handwriting messy and agitated. It was from Marcus. She considered throwing it away, but a need for finality made her open it. It was not an apology. It was a rambling, self-pitying screed, blaming her for his downfall, calling her vindictive and cruel, lamenting his lost fortune. He wrote of her public ambush and how she had destroyed him for a moment of pride. Reading it, Isabel felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even pity. It was like reading a letter from a bitter stranger. The man she had loved, the partner she had built a life with, was truly gone. This pathetic, whining creature was all that remained. She folded the letter, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it into the flames, watching the bitter words turn to gray ash and disappear. That was her closure. The final word on the saga of Marcus Davin came during a final wrap-up meeting with Arthur Finch. "The plea agreement has been finalized," Finch reported, closing a file. He'll plead guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of securities fraud. He avoids jail time, but he's paying over $200 million in fines and restitution. He is permanently barred from the securities industry. He's finished. And Miss Hayes? Isabel asked. Testified against him in exchange for immunity, Finch said with a shrug. Last I heard, she'd moved back to her parents' home in Ohio. A rather steep fall from the Olympic Tower. Finch looked at Isabel, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. You did not just win a case, Mrs. Davin. You navigated an impossible situation with a courage and strategic brilliance I have seldom witnessed. You reclaimed a life. Years passed, not in a blur, but as a series of deliberate, joyful moments. The Isabel D. Foundation became a beacon of hope and a powerhouse of innovation, launching the careers of hundreds of women who, like her, refused to be footnotes in someone else's story. Isabel found love again, not in a grand, dramatic fashion, but in the quiet, steady way that true partnerships are built. He was an architect, a kind man who saw her not as a symbol or a survivor, but as the brilliant, funny, and passionate woman she was. Together, they didn't conquer the city, they savored it, finding beauty in quiet museum visits and laughter-filled dinners in small, neighborhood restaurants. One evening, sitting on the board of Davin Industries, now a leader in ethical business practices under her guidance, she saw a news item about a disgraced former CEO living a quiet, anonymous life in Florida. She felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a distant, detached acknowledgement of a life she no longer recognized as her own. She had not just survived, she had thrived, building an empire not on lies, but on integrity, and proving that the best revenge isn't a single, fiery moment of destruction, but a lifetime of spectacular, happy, and meaningful success. Her masterpiece was never the life she built with Marcus. It was the one she built for herself, from the ashes up. Isabel's story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest betrayals. If her journey from a wronged wife to the architect of her own destiny inspired you, let us know in the comments which part of her story resonated with you the most. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of resilience, and be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more stories of justice, strength, and incredible transformations. You won't want to miss what's coming next.